Hey everybody, and welcome to today's panel. We're inviting the Air Force EWI to listen in about data and analytics trends with Joe Caserta and Doug Laney. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting us to put on this panel to help advise and educate the Air Force. I have a few quick slides about Caserta and what we do and why we're talking about this today, and then we can jump right into the questions. Also, I just want to say this is being recorded, so I will send you a recording to the email address you provided when you registered. And also, this is a live discussion. So in addition to the questions you guys asked, I'd love it for you to ask questions in the questions panel on your right. So let's get started. If you bear with me just one moment. All right, there we go.
Looks good.
Thank you. So a little bit about Caserta. So who we are. So first of all, we're a data and analytics consulting firm. We advise companies on how to unleash the power of their data. And we do that through technology. We do that through our roadmaps and methodologies. And we do it through actually implementing these solutions across many Fortune 500 companies and also local and state governments. We're laser focused on data solutions. Here are just some of the things that we do, everything from data strategy all the way through artificial intelligence and everything in between. We always take a project approach to our clients. So when we try to understand their business goals, we could then tell them which technologies, which solutions, and which methodologies are best for their use case. These are just a few companies who we serve. This is a snapshot of our clients at a glance. Our main focuses are really financial services, healthcare, insurance, education, media, entertainment, and lifestyle. And about education, and this is really why we're doing this today, education is really a hallmark of Caserta. It is baked into our core value. We love educating both the public and companies on how to really use data and analytics in order to advance their business goals and what that means. Today, we're going to have two excellent panelists, Joe Caserta, who is our founding CEO of Caserta. He is literally the guy that wrote the book on data warehousing and ETL, named the Data Warehouse ETL Toolkit. Joe is a technologist, entrepreneur, and best-selling author. And he also tours the country. He used to tour the country. Soon again, he will be again touring the country when all this is over on using data and analytics. And then we have Doug Laney, who you may have heard as the father of the 3 V's of big data, and also recently who published a book called Infonomics, which deals with the measuring, managing, and monetizing of data assets. All right, so let's get started with some trends. So Doug, we can start with you. Tell me about some of the technological trends in data and analytics that you're seeing taking over in the near future. Which are some of the ones that excite you, and are there any trends that you would find concerning?
Concerning, well, I hadn't thought about that. But I think the 3 trends in our space, in the data and analytics space, that are most promising are certainly, and these probably won't come as much of a surprise, but artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think virtual reality and natural language generation and natural language processing, I think, are the big ones. AI and machine learning, because there's a lot of automation happening not only in data management, but in the way that organizations just operate. There are a lot of manual things that happen that can be handled more in a much more automated fashion. Virtual reality to be able to transport us to places where we can't be, and obviously we're doing some of that right now. Recently, we held an interesting kind of webinar where people created their own avatars and entered a virtual conference facility. So that was a kind of a unique experience for folks. And then for natural language generation and natural language processing, I think the natural language generation probably because there's a real push to do storytelling rather than just displaying charts and graphs, but actually telling a story, telling an actionable, inspirational story. And then natural language processing, being able to give commands to applications and devices by voice, obviously is a lot more efficient in certain scenarios than pointing and clicking with devices. So, yeah.
Do you find any of those trends concerning, or any trends that you would see, either technologically or shifts in culture?
There are ethical concerns around AI and machine learning because they can perpetuate bias, and so that's something that digital ethicists and data ethicists are quite concerned with. So I would imagine that at some point we'll end up using AI itself to identify the biases that are part and parcel of algorithms that we develop. Yeah.
Joe, what are some of the trends that you see happening?
There's trends that I see and there's trends that I want to see. What I think, and I'll give a little bit of both. So I think what is needed, that is just on the cusp of starting to happen and is probably the most exciting part of data today, is having data at your fingertips without worrying about where it's coming from and what's been done to it, and just trust it. And we're not quite there yet, but this is the hottest part, I think, that is needed in order for us to really advance. Like, we could write algorithms and we can, go through a lot of data science once we have the data, but getting that data in the corporate enterprise is still the biggest challenge. There's lots of smart people who can write algorithms right now, but there's not a whole lot of people who can figure out, hey, there's some external data that is available. There's some internal data that's probably more difficult to get, and and data in between, and structured data and unstructured data. How do I ingest all of that data into a place where I can actually work with it? How do I unify that data? How do I coalesce it so that it is meaningful across the spectrum of the different data sets? And then how do I get insights out of it? Figuring that out and being able to automate that 100% and have it happen in milliseconds, as quick as a Google search, that's where we need to be. That is not happening yet. I think year 2020, if the pandemic hadn't started, we'd be a little bit closer. But I think nonetheless, 2020 is the year where this really is going to start taking off, and we'll probably start seeing it in our everyday life next year. My biggest concern, since you asked, is I believe that artificial intelligence is not even close to the maturity level that it needs to be in order to be really effective. And the reason why I say it's not really effective is because what Doug said is it's incredibly biased. So what happens today is I go on the internet, I search for things, I go on social media, I say things, I go on e-commerce sites and I buy things, and then lots of smart people write really sophisticated algorithms and AI interactions in order to get me to do more of those same things. That's not terribly interesting. And it's actually keeping my world kind of closed. I think what the next level of AI is to broaden people's horizons, not only give people what they want, but also broaden your horizon to perspectives outside of your comfort zone, to make people smarter.
That's great. So if we move into AI, because the next question deals with what are the future trends that the United States isn't taking into account? Do you think that there are parts of AI that we should be concerned that we're not taking into account from the perspective of the United States?
I don't know whether I would say the U.S. is behind or ahead in AI. I think that the trends that I see are what's called hyper automation and autonomous things. So we're automating some things to some degrees. We have self-driving automobiles, but extrapolate on that to perhaps even at some point the self-driving enterprise. What are all of the business functions within an organization that we could potentially automate to some degree, a greater or lesser degree? The other thing that there's a lot of talk about is, particularly in the military circles, is digital twins, being able to create a digital version of an entity or an item. in order to facilitate its execution and repair and so forth. I think we'll see a lot in the area of human augmentation, be able to augment people's various senses and their physical capabilities. Blockchain is always hanging out there as something everybody talks about, and how we're going to actually be using blockchain to trace assets back to their origin and provide these immutable ledgers. I think we haven't even really begun to think of the potential use cases for blockchain.
So I'll give my 2 cents. So the question, I think, was, where is the U.S. lacking in the advancement of AI, something along those lines,
or any other future trends? But yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we're really bad at still to this day is we can't identify bad actors, and it's really hard, right? What is a bad actor? I think of selling reverse mortgages to the elderly. Is that good or is that bad? Right? It's, being a troll on social media to get people to like interact and get people passionate about what they believe in. Is that good or bad? The challenge is, I think we haven't really come up with how to figure out in an automated way things that are like subjectivity, right? Because sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and figuring out, like, there's a lot of variables that determine whether it's good or whether it's bad, and some of it is emotional, and we haven't really gotten to that yet. And I think for AI to be really taken seriously to the point where AI is not only just sophisticated multi-touch algorithms, but really having like cognitive ability, that's the part that is still missing. That's the part that I think is going to take some real ingenuity and sophistication of some sophisticated minds to really figure out. And once we pass that hurdle, then I think we'll start seeing, it'll start being difficult to tell the difference between whether you're interacting with a human or whether you're interacting with a machine. I feel like we're getting closer and closer all the time. Unfortunately, right now, I personally prefer to interact with machines, right? Because they do exactly what I want them to do. But it's not healthy when it comes to the broad spectrum of life. And when you're trying to conduct a transaction, it's fine. But when you're trying to motivate people to take an action, there needs to be some governance around it, which we also lack as a country. And whether the country should be doing that governance or not, I believe that it is a new level of policing that that we are completely asleep at the wheel, to be completely candid. And there's tremendous opportunity in that space right now for us to advance.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to chime in on that, Doug?
Yeah, I was thinking there are, thinking about the kinds of technologies that I'd like to see better advances in. One of them comes to mind that's related to this is quantum computing, the ability to decrypt messages, to access secure applications and data and physical locations, using artificial intelligence collaboratively with quantum computing to perhaps identify our own security vulnerabilities, to exploit enemies' security vulnerabilities, to inform strategy recommendations and automation, even enable semi-autonomous weapons and better assessing strategic and tactical positions. So those are some of the things that I've spoken with some of the other branches of the military and intelligence community about in the past.
Oh, that's great. Building on the AI topic, we just got a great question. This is about the weaknesses in AI or learning algorithms right now. And the question is, we always hear junk in gets junk out when it comes to system development. How does that relate to AI now? And what hurdles are there out there that causes junk in to happen as it pertains to AI development? It's a great question.
The great question, and you know, the big challenge there is in the quality of data. Most organizations don't even measure the quality of their data. So I know one of the questions later on is to talk about advances in data management. And we think one of those that's really important is for organizations to track and understand and quantify the quality of data on various dimensions: its accuracy, its completeness, its integrity, precision, scale, even the scarcity of data, to get a sense of its potential value to our organization. These are things that are just not being tracked, and if you do and when you do, you have a better. Joe talked about trust in data. There's you know, it certainly is something that can enable trust in data for any kind of analytics, up through and including machine learning and cognitive computing.
So I have a different slant on data and data quality and AI. I believe that you know, the ultimate goal is to be able to have clean data for artificial intelligence. But before you do that, I think the answer is to turn artificial intelligence on the data, and then have the AI actually attempt to clean the data. Because if you think about how is it done today, you know, we have human data analysts looking at the data, business subject matter experts advising the business analysts on the meaning of the data, and then looking and seeing, you know, what attributes are within, you know, bands, which values are in the allowed value list, which makes sense, you know. Are you trying to create a claim without an active policy? Like, there's business rules, there's you know, domain rules, there's quality rules. All of this stuff can actually be figured out by a machine. It's definitely not splitting atoms. And I think the goal is, when data defects exist, we should be able to detect them in milliseconds and correct them in milliseconds. And you know, it's a constant learning process. Just like when humans, you know, there's data that exists in a corporate enterprise for decades, and then when you create a report and it's exposed, then people say, oh wow, that's not right. Right? They always say the best way to get data fixed is to expose it. So what I'm suggesting is to expose it to AI, let the AI have a crack at it. Maybe it won't be 100% perfect, but it's going to be really close. And then when those reports are created, the anomalies that are seen visually will be lessened, and it'll be easier to react to by a human.
That's excellent. I think Doug may be having a camera issue one moment, but we do still hear him.
You can hear me all right?
So he's gonna we can hear you all right. So I'll pose the next question to Joe. Maybe you can turn it off and on.
Maybe I'll drop and come back in.
That's fine. So Joe, what will data analytics and as well as data management look like in 10 years from now?
10 years. Wow.
I know that's hard because, you know, we didn't even know COVID was coming, and that was just a couple months ago, but 10 years,
so
black swans aside.
So 10 years. So I'll leapfrog how we get there, and then maybe come back to it. But 10 years from now, so now we're talking 2030. By 2030, if I do my job right over the next several years, and you know, and start some industry trends leading towards this, 10 years from now, we should not be talking about data anymore. Or we'll be talking about data that's so abstract from today's world, then it becomes interesting again. But I do believe that if you think about the data that we harness today versus 10 years ago, right, and use that as a barometer. So things like being able to instantaneously get your heart rate and your blood oxygen levels and your blood pressure, like all of the things that we take for granted now, we can get them on our phone, right? Without any kind of invasive interaction. Going forward, a year, I'd say within 5 years from now, we will know exactly what our nutritional makeup is. So we will know right now, today in 2020, when we eat, why do we eat? What are we eating? We have no idea, right? We eat, it's kind of silly, right? We're eating based on things that we like, right? Things that taste good. We have some anecdotal knowledge that, yeah, you need some protein, you need some iron, you need, this particular vegetable is high in this particular vitamin. But we really don't know what is my level of magnesium right now? What is my level of calcium right now? What is my level of all of the nutritional needs of my body right now? And then what foods will fulfill the gap between what I have and what I need? I believe 10 years from now, that'll just be another day in the life. Like we will know that. We will eat for a purpose, we'll be healthier human beings, we'll be living longer. And it's all going to be based on data.
Doug, the question was, and welcome back, what data analytics or data management will look like in 10 years from now?
Let's see. One of the things that I've concluded is that for a long time we've been architecting data structures to produce reports for human eyeballs, and increasingly the consumers of data are not humans but machines. And so this requires us to kind of rethink pretty dramatically the way that we're organizing and architecting data for the different kinds of consumption patterns that machines have versus humans. And one of the things to look at is like the concept of marginal utility. Well, you can't keep sending a human the same information over and over again and expect them to pay attention to it. But machines don't suffer from marginal utility. So the way that we're producing and consuming and the pipelines for data and the way that we're organizing data are probably going to have to change quite a bit in order to facilitate machine usability, and that includes AI applications. Joe touched on earlier, becoming much more automated in terms of data being maybe self-organizing and automating data sourcing. We know we need this data. Let's go out and look and see where we can find it from the multitude of websites and sources and connected devices that are out there. Data integration, not just data presentation, but data integration will probably become much more just in time, the way that other kinds of assets or other kinds of products are today. We'll do more demand-based data integration based on the usage patterns of that data. I mentioned formal data quality and data valuation metrics, and then data governance is still a big topic, if not a word that people really like to talk about. I think it'll become much more embedded and automated in some regard. And then finally, I see certain organizations starting to manage data for their partners and suppliers to some degree. Walmart's a great example of that, probably Apple, Amazon. And so this notion of an extended information ecosystem is something that I think we'll see a lot more of, where there's data sharing among partners. The data itself carries the metadata along with it, including the rules about how and when and where it can be used. I kind of came up with this term, and probably I'm not the first one, but the concept of a data karetsu. If you're familiar with the Japanese concept of a karetsu, we'll see these organized groups of data that are shared by multiple entities. So
that's great, which is actually going to segue us into a question that just came in about all this data sharing. The question is, a big part of our world is now a personalized experience in our technology. What steps are being taken to draw the line between collecting data that companies or organizations need to be more effective while not causing a risk to an individual's privacy or security? I think that goes across finance, healthcare.
Yeah, I
This
mean,
privacy is every industry.
If I could take the first crack at
oh,
this one,
oh,
it also dovetail in the second one where I had another thought while Doug was talking. When we talk about information, right? So there's data, right? And then data ultimately turns into information, and then information ultimately turns into knowledge, right? And then knowledge ultimately turns into intelligence. Like hopefully that those are the breadcrumbs that you want to follow. I do believe that as we advance with data, the gap between raw data and intelligence will get smaller because all of the pieces in between will become so much more efficient. For example, like right now, something happened. There's an event. We have to wait for that event to be recorded. Then we have to wait for that recording to be captured. Then we have to wait for that capture to be shared, and then we have to wait for that shared information now to be published, and then now we can read it, and then we can comprehend it, and then we can do something about it. Like that, that life cycle is just, it's been since Benjamin Franklin. Like not a whole lot has changed.
right.
I believe that as things happen, they will instantaneously become available and also instantaneously be turned into information. So, I think the days of corporate reporting, back to this 10-year question, corporate reporting will be a thing of the past. Like we'll read corporate reports like at museums, because once we get to the point where artificial intelligence can have a sophisticated conversation through chatbot type of technology about your data and about your information in a dialogue, there's no more need for a report. If you can ask, a machine about the health of your business, about the health of a product, about anything, right? The health of yourself. You don't need reports anymore. You don't even need dashboards anymore. Einstein once said that, never bother remembering something that you can write down, right? And you can easily read it later. And I think that what we're starting to do is we're starting to make things so accessible that we don't have to waste our brain with like busyness. So I think what that's going to do is it's going to start freeing our minds to get even more advanced. Now the challenge, especially in American society, is to not let people get lazy, because that can happen. That's one of the challenges we have in America. But if we can say, okay, you don't have to worry about, if you think about like what is education, what is schooling, where they're basically taking as much information as they can and then imparting it on you so that you have information at your fingertips so that you can make intelligent decisions in advanced society. If you can have all of that really fast without 4 years of learning, but just instantaneously at your fingertips, imagine like how much further you can advance and how quickly you can advance. Younger ages, broader spectrums of topics. I think it's like really the next 10 years are going to be very, very, very exciting times on the integration between data and information and knowledge and intelligence.
Okay. I think the issues with the risk to somebody's privacy are being dealt with fairly well at a regulatory level. Certainly in Europe with the GDPR, the Global Data Protection Regulation, and then also the similar California Privacy Act. They carry a degree of monitoring and penalties along with them for the mishandling of private data. So I think they've done a good job. I don't think it's been too heavy-handed. Some of the key components of those regulations, like having to disclose what you're going to do with that data at the point when you collect it, and then giving people the right to be forgotten and the right to know what data you've collected on them. That all provides a level of transparency across the spectrum that I think has been certainly warranted. What it has done is it's given some organizations pause and said, well, listen, Now we're not able to do stuff with our customer data anymore. And we at Caserta have come up with some ways to help organizations kind of cut through that. One of those is a model where, like, I can't sell you my customer data anymore, but I can sell your stuff to my customers. So it's a way for me to be able to monetize my customer data without having to expose it externally. So in that way, I become an entity that offers ancillary products and services to my customers and perhaps takes a cut of that. So, anyone who tells us that, we can no longer monetize our customer data is really sorely mistaken, and we have, developed some methods to help them cut through that.
I'll just add something quick that when it comes to privacy, like, why do we care about privacy? And like, if we really think about it, it goes back to one of my original statements in the seminar, where it was, we need to identify the bad actors. And the bad actors are doing bad things with our data, our personal data. And if you think of, if you're as old as I am, you remember the days when you didn't lock your front door, right? When I was a kid, we never locked our front door. Even growing up in the inner New York City, we never locked our front door. And then people started robbing houses, and now you got to lock your front door. It's the same type of thing. If no one started robbing houses, we'd probably still leave our doors open. I think that, what's the advantage? You can have guests come in without bothering to knock and see who, right? It was actually a better quality of life. And I think there's a lot of what we do with data when we share our data that improves our quality of life. I know with me, every minute of my life counts. There's a value to it. And if I go onto a website and it's not completely customized to my personal needs, I'm not going to shop there, and I'm not going to do business. And the only way they know what my needs are is by looking at my personal data. And I actually do things online to train the machines so that I have a better, more efficient experience when I do things online. And I'm okay with that. But I do think the minute a bad actor captures my data and does something bad with it, then I stop, right? It's like putting the lock on my door. So I think proactively, not to blame the government, but I believe that there's a new level of policing that needs to be done in these times that is just not being done. It's not being taken seriously enough, and I think it needs to.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move on to the next question asked. The Air Force leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to data management and data analytics. In one of your speeches, Joe, this is referring to you, you talk about the data pyramid. Can you talk about what that is and how we can get started in setting the base level of the pyramid?
Sure. Yeah, so the pyramid, it's a few tiers, and the bottom is wide and the top is narrow, just like a pyramid, and it's trying to illustrate the volume of data. So as transactions occur or events occur, even if the event is, your heart is beating, right? That's an event, and we can stream that data, and it's a lot of it, right? So the capturing or ingesting of raw data as it's occurring in real time goes into the bottom of the pyramid. As that data goes through a life cycle of cleansing, conforming, consolidating, enriching, getting insight, disseminating, it goes through a series of actions where more data governance is applied and more users have access to it, to the point where at the tip of the pyramid is fully governed data that pretty much anyone can have access to. For example, any one of us on this call right now can, and this is kind of a bad example because there's a quarantine on sports, but theoretically we could all ask our favorite chatbot, what's the score of last night's game? And we'll all have access to it. That is fully governed data that's been through a life cycle of cleaning, conforming, consolidating, and enriching, validating, and and presenting, right? And that's essentially what the data pyramid is. Starts at raw data, applies logic, some through human intervention nowadays, ultimately through purely from machine learning and artificial intelligence, and then presented for human consumption or other machines consumption.
All right, thank you. I tried to share it. I'm not sure if everyone can see that.
Yeah.
As the questions are being asked. Great. Doug, did you want to chime in on anything there about the structure or ingestion? Okay.
So
thank you, Joe.
I'll just say one more thing about this. So one of the challenges today is with data is it has a label called identity resolution, right? But what that label means is data comes from all different places. Let's stick to the score of the game last night, right? The score of the game last night may come from a particular source. Let's say now you want to ask interesting questions like which player made the most scores? And then after you ask that, say, okay, where did that player come from? What was that player's training? What was his statistics last year? Right? Each one of those questions is grabbing data from different sources all over the place, everything from his college, his or her, right, from her college, from previous games, previous teams, coaches, anecdotes. It could come from anywhere, right? One of today's challenges is how do you identify all of those different data sources are all talking about that same player? And that's identity resolution. You want to be able to identify an entity of something, whether it's a player or a product or a company or a stock ticker or whatever, right? And you want to be able to say, okay, where is that entity, person, place, or thing all over the world? And I want to be able to integrate all of it. Really hard to do. Like anybody in corporate America, you can't even do it between two systems. You have Salesforce and you have SAP. And I want to see like, it's impossible, right? That used to be labeled master data management, an impossible task to achieve. And millions of dollars, years to implement. You can get it right, but it's an arduous task. Instead, what we're doing now in modern data engineering is we're taking all of those different entities, we're putting it into a graph database, and we're basically connecting, if you think of like a Facebook graph, where here's all of your friends that you're connected to. Basically, we're saying, here's all of the entities that are the same person, place, or thing, and we're connecting them all. So now it doesn't matter what they're named or what their ID is or what their label is. All we care about is it's the same entity. We connect them all through nodes and vectors within the graph. And then you can do very holistic reporting, drilling up and drilling down different levels of detail, everything from the score of the game to his batting average in 1972, right? And that is not the future, that's what's happening now, but it's very, very different from how most of corporate America is dealing with master data management today. And it's a very, very strong opportunity. If I was entering the workforce, data right now, that's a really hot area to become a specialist.
If you think about that scenario that Joe just walked through, there are a couple of other interesting things that we've talked about that can facilitate that. One is that notion of just-in-time data. So as I ask a question of whatever device it is, in the background, that device is making all of those connections in anticipation of me continuing that query. The other thing would be to retain the context of the conversation. Now, right now, if you talk to Siri or Google or Alexa or whatever, it doesn't retain the context of your conversation very well, if at all. So you have to kind of repeat things like what happened in the game last night, who scored the most runs, then what was his batting average, and when did he enter the league. You can't have that the kind of context retention style of conversation with most devices today, and I think that's something that we'll see some advances in. I know the technology has been around for 20 plus years. We just don't see it evident in in today's voice apps.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
We're actually going to take a turn now with the next question and focus on the situation. In the same speech, I'm assuming this talks about the data pyramid. Joe, you talked about healthcare innovation. How has COVID-19 accelerated or decelerated its innovation? I guess it's done both, and you could talk about where that happened.
Yeah, so I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I'd say that since COVID affected Caserta as a company as of March 10th. That's when we shut our doors as a business and became a virtual company. I shut our offices, not our business. And so, when the first week or two, basically glued to the television, what is going on, right? Watching the news. In those 2 weeks, I think I heard the word data more than I've heard in the previous 30 years combined. It's incredible. It's incredible how evident it has become that without data, it's impossible to manage a pandemic. It's impossible. You can't do it. Without proper testing and capturing the test results and being able to see the impact of different types of treatment, seeing the trends by geographic location so that you can dispatch help, inventory levels of personally protective equipment, all of the things that are relevant in this pandemic is all being managed by data, and without data, it would just not be managed. I also think that the speed to figure out what an eventual vaccine will have in it from a chemical perspective, I think is using very, very advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, and that is, we are learning so much. We're doing so much, learning by doing, out of necessity and out of urgency, that I think the time to deliver is becoming so, politics aside, and whether it could actually be done faster aside. But I think that we've actually taken healthcare and kind of turned it on its head, right? We turned it on its head where, like, typically to get a drug approved is a multi-year life cycle. What we're doing now is we're actually learning and correcting it. Normally you have a way of an idea. That idea turns into a thesis. That thesis turns into a clinical trial. That clinical trial turns into a drug. That drug goes through an approval process, right? That whole life cycle is now being done like almost in parallel swim lanes, right? We are like course correcting as we go so fast. It's like we've finally applied agile methods to the healthcare healthcare/corporate/government innovation, which is so overdue. And I think that's probably, if anything good comes of this pandemic, that's one of the things that I think is, if we maintain it, like, hopefully when it's over, we don't go back to business as usual. That's the risk, right? But I do think that is probably, for me, one of the most exciting parts about the impact.
And it's interesting to see some of the parallels between the healthcare space and the military and intelligence community, and the challenges with sharing information across entities. Even research data within the healthcare profession tends to be really proprietary, and I think the pandemic has companies kind of rethinking this, right, and sharing previous research that they've learned about molecules or prior viruses to help accelerate the global understanding and the solution. The other thing that I think we're seeing from all of this is a kind of raising of the bar of the general data literacy of the public. We talk a lot about data literacy with our clients, in how they can get more people throughout the organization to understand what data is, what it means, how to use it, how not to use it, and so forth. And I think the general public now, the level of data literacy from watching all the news and seeing all the charts has really improved. People are starting to question, why do I really care about kind of the historical chart? I want to see how this thing is projected. What does the future look like? And we try to get our clients to think more along those lines as well, rather than just exploring what happened in the past. What kind of, how can we do diagnosis or prescriptive or predictive analytics on top of the data? That's where the real value happens. The other thing I think we're seeing is some scenario, not scenario planning, but scenarios being generated. What happens under different kinds of scenarios? And I think that's really important for businesses to do as well, not just to predict and project things, but what happens if something happens? What do I need to do to respond as proactively as possible to that? So those are some of the things that I think are happening in businesses. As far as the global economy goes, one of the big challenges is a lot of forecasts are broken. Too many companies have built their forecasts based on trend analysis, looking at what have we done in the past and how does that correlate to what we're doing today, rather than looking outside on what are the leading indicators of the business. So more and more companies are having to take a look at external data in order to improve their forecasts to more driver-based forecast models instead of trend-based forecast models. So I think those are some of the things that we've learned from the crisis.
Do you guys want to chime in on how it's changed the data landscape, not just in healthcare, but across the board because of the pandemic? Do you feel that the way we're going to treat data, both privacy, security, elsewise, will change as a result of what has just happened? Or is happening still?
Maybe
Go ahead.
maybe we just need to be a little more contextual. There are a lot of rules put on data and data sharing that are somewhat arbitrary and maybe based on one thing in the past that happened with sharing data. And I think we need to project a little bit more about I think more opportunistically about data sharing, and that the rules for data sharing and exposure need to be a bit more contextual. I don't know exactly what form that takes, but yeah.
I'd say one thing that is definitely a pattern that I hope continues is COVID has caused companies, including ours, to become more efficient, right? We are spending all day, every day. I know I'm in this chair, on this screen, doing video conferences all day long, every day. And so the thought of having time to look at reports and look at numbers and gather data, there's just no time anymore. So it is forcing us to become more efficient. And the same thing with our clients. During, March was tough because everybody just had a moratorium on new projects because nobody knew what the future looked like. But now, actually, we are seeing business propel because people are realizing that they have to become more efficient and the best way to do that is through data. And being able to optimize data to get to the answer faster. Like that is the goal, get to the answer faster. And the best way to do that is through data. And especially when you don't have the luxury of walking down the hall to your neighbor with the answer. You need to figure out another way to get it at your fingertips, and that's through interactive interactions with your data directly. And that's a trend that we're starting to see now, and I think that is a trend. Once people get used to that, I'll call it a lifestyle, but a way of working. It'll be hard to go back. It'll be hard to go back. I think that people will start to become more dependent on data as a result of using it out of necessity during this COVID epidemic.
Thanks, Joe. And this may be our last question because of time constraints. So if we don't get to your question, please email it to me and I will definitely get an answer to you. This is a great one about data management that came in. In the Air Force, we tend to have issues with overclassification, leading to the undersharing of information. In industry, I see this mirrored with proprietary information. What best practices have you seen to break down these sorts of barriers and allow for data sharing to achieve common goals?
Yeah. At a high
I
level,
guess,
it's really cultural. There are organizations that train and trust, and then there are organizations that monitor and punish, and every kind of organization in between. I'm not saying which is right or wrong, but uh, I tend to like the train people and trust them to do the right things with data, and yes, there needs to be a component of monitoring and enforcement as well.
Yeah, if you were to ask me what is the number one prohibitor
Inhibitor.
of advancement in data solutions, it's data hoarding. And what data hoarding means is I consider this my proprietary data, and you can't see it. And over classifying, over securing. Thinking of another over, but
Yeah.
but
Governing. Yeah.
over governing, exactly right. Over governing, that is a challenge. Why do we do that? I think the reason we do that is because knowledge, data, again, if you look, data equals knowledge and knowledge equals intelligence. And then the end of that pipeline that I didn't talk about earlier, ultimately it equals power. And people hate to give up their power. And when you have data, you have power. And if you share your data, then now you're diluting your power and you're empowering others.
Right.
That is old thinking, that is archaic thinking, and it is detrimental to the advancement of business and detrimental of advancement of even your own career nowadays. Like it is, like Doug said, it's becoming, there is a cultural shift in corporate America where data democratization is a requirement now for the advancement of the business. And people who don't do it should be, and we are seeing trends that they are now being penalized.
can you tell me a little bit about data democratization, Joe?
So data democratization means that you are breaking down, by design, breaking down the silos of the different parts of your business and sharing it holistically, right? So any information that is created by the business should be used for the business from any point of, if you're in marketing and sales wants to see your data, they should. If operations wants to see your data, they should. And without data democratization, that doesn't happen. Yeah. Marketing data is marketing data, sales data, operations data is operations data.
Yep. And this is all part of becoming a data-driven organization, and it starts from the top with change management that goes beyond, just talking about data as an asset, but actually behaving as if it is a real asset to the organization. It's the organization's asset, not the asset of any individual or business unit.
Yeah. Yep. And if the purpose of this seminar is to help people navigate their career, the tech side is interesting and fun, and we're nerds and we like that. The real opportunity in the future is the softer side of data. It's helping companies become data literate. It's helping data democracy. It's helping figure out how to govern different elements of data for different use cases. And all of that is not technical. All of that is really just what we call data therapy, right? It's helping people come to terms with that. It's a different way. You basically, it's a big ask, right? And then you're basically asking people to take everything that they've done over the course of their career, check it at the door, and trust something that they didn't personally create, and stake your career on it, right? It's not an easy thing to ask people to do. So there needs to be methods and policies and procedures and training and education to do this in order to really get data to where it needs to be in corporate America and the world. And there, it's in its infancy. We're trying it. We have a data literacy practice at Caserta, but even what we have is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a whole world of consulting that needs to be established that is not there yet.
Excellent. We did have one more question, but it's actually one that we're going to follow up by email, but I just wanted to tell you that I did receive it. It is about further reading on these topics that you can learn more. I'm going to have Joe and Doug put together a short list of reading that they could do. Obviously, the Big Data Warehouse ETL Toolkit is one, and Infonomics by Doug Laney is another. But aside from those, we'll put together a list and I'll send it out to all of you after the webinar. That's all the time we have for today. Again, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting us to talk to you guys. And you should have my email with any further questions and I'll get them answered. Everyone take care. Thank you again.
Everyone. Be well.
Thank you.